Lovely. So this story is called A River Lost, and it is by Lynn Bragg, and I believe it's illustrated by Virgil Smoker Marchand. So these are two native people that wrote this story. All right. Yeah, glad to hear it. So I am going to read, normally I don't, but I'm going to read the prologue that kind of set the story up because it is a true story and you might need a little background. So A River Lost is the story of an ancient culture forever changed by modern technology. It is the story of my son's tribe, the Arrow Lakes tribe, now part of the Colville Confederated Tribes. For thousands of years, this tribe's way of life revolved around the Columbia River and fishing for salmon at the river's falls. All of this was taken away from them during the New Deal. The Grand Coulee Dam was built. So you guys know the Grand Coulee Dam is in Washington. Has anybody been there? It's right in the middle of our state. Like, nope. None of you? Oh, wow. So
I've never gone past the Spokane.
Well, it's really close to there, right? Like it's like right in the middle of the state. So it's really close to Spokane. Probably a little bit further out, like closer to Yakima, like somewhere between Spokane and Yakima. Anyways, it's a pretty neat dam and it's a big deal because it is the biggest dam. It is the biggest dam. Like it makes the most power out of all the dams. That's kind of a big deal. We're just some little state that happens to have a really big river. The dam had no fish ladders. Hence, the salmon could never return to this once fertile fishing site. The dam also wiped out the entire town of Echilium with very little advance notice to the town's residents. Many elders of the tribe did not believe this could really happen, and therefore many of them did not move their homes out of the path of the oncoming water to the last possible moment. The Colville tribal members finally received payment promised to them when the dam was built in 1930. They received the payment on April 7th, 1995. So in 1930s, they built a dam, flooded the tribe's homeland, and promised that they were going to pay, and they didn't pay them until 1995. So over 50 years later, their children got the payment that was promised to the grandparents. So let's read the story, and this is really good pictures too. So I will show the pictures before and after I read the story. So Topa refused to believe what was happening. I stood with my great-grandmother Topa on the porch of the home she had lived in all of her adult life. We watched smoke rising from the fires below. As night fell, the sky took on a yellow glow and flickering orange flames lit up the horizon. Topa's little clapboard cabin was nestled against the hillside, on the banks of the river. Behind the rustic structure, brown hills dotted with sweet-smelling pine trees rolled upward toward dense forest. Beyond the rickety French porch lay the mighty river that was the lifeline to our people. The acrid, smoky smell filled the night air. Houses that had not yet been moved were being burned to make way for the man-made lake. The Indian agent had told the people of my tribe that they must move their entire village, or it would be destroyed by the rising waters behind the grand dam the government had built. This massive concrete dam would change our way of life forever, taking from us our sacred river and our precious salmon, or the Intitiha. For thousands of years, my people had taken their food, traveled and met at the river and the river's falls. The rocks below the falls had been hollowed out by the constant pummeling of the cascading river. These rocks, when full of water, looked like cooking kettles. Early fur traders called my people La Chandeliers, or the Kettle Indians. Each summer, families from our tribe traveled up the river to the falls in search of food. The summer encampments brought families from tribes near and far to fish the river, trade, and visit friends and relatives. The falls had been an important meeting place for generations. In the old days, when the salmon were running, hundreds of teepees and lodges had lined the banks of the great river. Coastal Indians crossed the Cascade Mountains and brought with them beautiful shells to trade. Plains Indians came across the Rocky Mountains, bringing buffalo hides and dried meat to trade for salmon. In turn, families from my tribe had sometimes journeyed east to the plains to hunt the buffalo. Tupa folded her arms across her chest defiantly. How can man change the rushing waters of the river into still waters of a lake? She scoffed. Like many of our elders, Tupa could not accept what was happening. It did not seem possible that man's actions could do this, turn our river and our land into a great lake. It was very difficult to convince great-grandmother that she must move. It was time now for Topa to leave her home behind. The Grand Dam was finished, and soon the waters of the new lake would begin rising behind the dam. Topa stayed in the house, refusing to watch as we harvested her beloved garden. Everything we wished to save had to be moved to higher ground. Homes, animals, gardens, and our church were moved. Even burial sites had to be dug up and moved uphill. Only when great-grandmother could see the water rising did she agree to leave her home. We had very little time before the rising tide of water would flood the place where our village had stood. As I helped Tupa pack her possessions, she seemed sad and was silent. Then, in a dust-covered box, she found an old picture of herself as a small girl and her family's summer camp near the falls. Her dark eyes grew bright with memories of her childhood as she began to speak. You know, Cindy Matt, Tupa paused and leaned against a stack of boxes. Every summer, my family camped at the falls. When the salmon swam upstream to spawn, the water became so thick and matted that their red bodies, that it looked as if you could walk across the river on the backs of the Intitiha. So it's a great big falls right now. When they dam it, the water won't go over anymore. It was my job to help my mother prepare our summer home at the falls. Mother and I gathered cooking utensils, food, woven mats, and skins for bedding. Father packed his spears, gaff hooks, and baskets used for fishing the falls. My baby brother was laced tightly into his cradle board for the journey up the river. Our family traveled up the river as far as possible in a pine bark canoe that Father had stretched over a cedar frame. The river was calm at first, but soon became turbulent. When the water became too rough, we continued our trip to the falls on foot. Our home for the summer was a deerskin teepee at the base of the falls. So I want you guys to notice the text feature here. She's telling a story, and it's all in italics. It changed because she's thinking back in time to when she was a little girl. So it all changed to an italics writing so that you know it was a story. Once at the camp, my Sini Mat, Tupa continued, her eyes sparkling with life, every person had chores to do. Even the littlest child helped by gathering firewood. My work was with Mother setting up our shelter, cooking and drying the salmon in preparation for winter. But I loved to watch the men fish at the falls. Many salmon were caught in basket nets and traps made from fir boughs. These nets and traps were stretched out across the falls to trap the fish as they leapt against the crashing cascade of water. Salmon that did not leap completely over the falls fell back into the woven basket nets and traps. Most exciting was watching Father and the other man make their way out into the rushing, churning water over slippery, wet rocks. And you can see they're at the top of the falls, and the falls are just over here. The men made their way onto narrow platforms made of 2 pieces of wood tied together with bark laces. Once there, they carefully perched over the falls with spears and gaff hooks. When a fish was caught, Father dropped down on his stomach for balance and twisted the barbs of his spear into the salmon's flesh. In this way, Father could catch 20 salmon per day. Another 300 to 400 fish were caught in the baskets and traps. Fishing in this manner was very dangerous. If a man slipped, he could be sucked into the rushing current below. The strong undertow could easily pull a grown man down, drowning him. If somehow he escaped the pull of the undertow, his body might be smashed against the rocks by the angry waters. So we have this eagle over here catching a fish and a native person over here spearing one. They just go out on these little ledges and would just spear the fish as they jumped up over the falls, just like a bear catching fish as they were trying to get up the river. just like the eagle catches the fish. Yeah, well, he's in the water, like in his swimsuit, guy. Yeah, he's wearing like just a little swimsuit. I mean, you wouldn't want to wear all your clothes in the middle of the river, would you?
He looks like he lives like before, like he looks like he lives in like BC.
Yeah, well, this is ancient. This is long ago. But I mean, it's not, I mean, she's telling the story of when she was a little kid. So this is like 150 years ago, probably about, maybe even 200 years.
BC was like 1,000.
Yeah. Well, remember when we talk about it, the natives were here that long ago. Yeah. No, sweetie, no. Let me finish. She's talking about the old days. Okay. She's an old lady talking about when she was a little kid. Yeah. Okay. In those days, every family in the tribe was rich with salmon. There was enough salmon caught to last each family until the next season. Some of the fish was eaten fresh, but much of it was dried. As a young girl, I helped the women hang the fish on drying racks. Drying the salmon preserved it through the cold, snowy winter. We celebrated the salmon run, feasting on the fresh roasted salmon and freshwater crayfish served up on trays made from the wood of the willow tree. The feast also included huckleberries we girls and women had picked from the hills, and camas roots dug in the valleys and steamed in underground pits. Sacks woven tightly from cedar and corn husks stored the dry salmon for future meals. We talked about this before. You can see how they have it on around the fire on those sticks. The salmon, or the intitiha, was our money. The fish held great value for us. We traded for hides from the Plains tribes. Later, we traded salmon for flour, guns, food, and tobacco from the settlers at the fort. Deer and buffalo hides were tanned and made into teepees, saddle blankets, bedding, robes, clothing, moccasins, and ropes. By trading salmon, roots, and berries from our lands for buffalo from the plains, our people had a great variety of foods to last all winter long. The Salmon Chief, Kinkanaka, ruled over the community of people who had come to the falls to fish and trade. He made sure that the salmon were shared fairly among all of the families. Kinkanaka, our Salmon Chief, was respectful of his people, especially elders, women, and children. The people of the tribe took care of each other. They always shared with those in need. Another picture of the salmon being smoked around the fire there traditionally. It's right there at the falls. As more and more settlers moved into our lands, the fish began to thin out. Each year, fewer salmon were caught at the summer encampments. As I grew older, it seemed there were more settlers and less salmon at the falls every year. Now Sinimat, tope aside and lower her eyes to the faded picture clutched tightly in her wrinkled brown hands. She stared silently at the photograph for a very long time. They tell us the salmon will not come at all. Tupa's words were true. There were no fish ladders in the dam that was built on our land. Across our river, the salmon would no longer come to the falls to spawn. Our river, our falls, our salmon, and our homes were to be taken by this dam. We were promised payment, but it would take the government over 50 years to fulfill the promise. We moved Tupa up the hill. The water rising behind the dam wiped out our village. It flooded the land where our houses stood on the banks of the river. Our people could not comprehend this, especially the elders. When the time came to flood our village, some of my people had only a few hours to move their belongings before the new lake took their homes. So here is this Grand Coulee Dam, and this is exactly what it looks like in real life. It's a very good drawing of it. As you notice, there is no salmon passage of any kind. And as we know, what we learned about salmon is they kind of need that. Let me read the last page before I continue on. Tupa died before my tribe received any payment for what this dam had taken from us. Today, my people live on the shore of an enormous lake created by the largest dam in North America. A few elders remember what life was like when the salmon traveled up the mighty river from the ocean to the falls. When they are gone, there will be no one left to remember this way of life. And this is a picture of the dam from down below. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but they have some, like in the shadow of the water, we have some native shadows trekking along. So that is the end of that story. It's a sad story, but it's a true story. And that dam is the Grand Coulee Dam.